Hello and welcome to the latest edition of Extra Time with me, James Brackpool. And with us in the studio today is former Walsall and West Bromwich Albion footballer Stan Jones. Stan, welcome.
Thank you very much.
No problem. So let's start with Walsall, one of the two of our clubs you've played for.
Yeah.
Do you remember sort of going there and signing pro terms, because you're only very young, weren't you, when you started there?
I remember my first contact with Walsall Football Club was through Major Buckley knocking on my grand's door in Highley, which is a village on the River Severn near Bridge North. And there's Major stood on the doorstep and he said, I'd like to sign you for Walsall Football Club. Can I come in?
And you just, yeah.
Certainly.
Do you want to?
Yeah, and he came in and we had a chat. And I signed the form and he said, we'll let you know when to report for pre-season training. And that was my first and only contact, as far as I knew, with Walsall Football Club. And of course, when I arrived, it was a totally new world to me. People I'd read about in the paper were having come down from, finished their careers at Wolves and the Albion and Birmingham and these sort of clubs. And to be able to talk to them and play with them and play in the five-a-sides with them and do the training with them, that sort of experience could not be gained in any other sort of environment. And I think a lot of it now is a bit of a problem with the fact that there's now no longer reserve team football of a serious nature. The under-21s is what it says it is, under-21s. So under-21s are trying to learn with under-21s. And in my time, I was a lad of 16, coming 17, playing with people like Jimmy Dudley, who'd had 10 years in the Albion first team, and Billy Crook, who'd been at the Wolves. He was one of the few part-time players playing in the first division because he was an accountant by trade. And he could make more money in his accountancy plus his football than he could playing football. He was a fabulous player. He was in the Wolves first team regularly. And of course, in today's world, the transfer of senior, experienced pros finishing at most of the first division clubs at that time at 31, 32, 33, that sort of age group. They then came down a league or two leagues to finish off their playing time. And basically, those 2 or 3 years that they were at a smaller club were without any doubt the best teachers any young footballer can have. I mean, I'm still very friendly with Dave Walsh, who was the centre forward from the Villa, who came to Walsall. He'd played for Ireland and the Villa and West Brom. He's now 92 or 3, something like that. And he's the oldest, as far as I know, the oldest former West Bromwich Albion player still alive.
Right.
And he's an absolutely first-class bloke. And to have people like him and the other lads I've mentioned, even only talking to you about the game, that makes the difference between whether you learn or whether you have to learn the hard way. They make the learning a lot easier.
And for a young centre-back like yourself, I mean, you've got these guys, filling in at right back or left back in your ear all game,
Unbelievable.
What better way was there to learn, really?
And that also, in my opinion at the moment, is part of the problems that I see in back four formations, is that the talking side of it, which they used to give to us, that side of it is missing a bit in the game today. And whether that's because there's a lot of lads who don't speak English as a natural first language, or whether it's because there's some slight difference in the way things are taught now, but I like to think it's because of the language problem. Because I see most players who get asked questions who are non-English or non-British, before they answer the question, there's almost like a calculation going in their head. What's he asked me?
And that obviously
and that's
on
too
a pitch,
late on a pitch. It's too late.
That fraction of a second, and
it's a waste
of
of time. Yeah.
So obviously, you at Walsall. Am I right in saying you spent 3-4 years at Walsall? In your first time, anyway.
Yeah, when I signed, I was an apprentice electrician at the pit.
Yeah.
And Bill Moore, who would come to Walsall as a manager, he said to me, he said, "You got a big decision to make now." He said, "If you want to be a football player, you're going to have to come full time." He said, "And especially guys with your build, as a big lad." He said, "You need full-time training to marry all that lot up." And of course, my decision had to be based on the fact that as an apprentice electrician in the pit, I wouldn't have got called up for national service. But the minute I left the pit to go full-time, I then became liable for national service. And I said, well, I'm happy to cope with that. I said, and if you think it's in my best interests and you think that I can make the grade, then I'm going to sign full-time. And he said, and I'll tell you now, he said, before we go any farther, he said, as you go through your career, he said, I'm saying to you that the best years of your career will be 28 to 32 without the unfortunate parts of being injured. If you're injured, that's a different ball game.
Well, you can never account for that, can you?
But he said, in my opinion, he said, it takes until you're 28 to learn to play your position properly. And the more I've gone through football and had a bit of experience after finishing playing with the youth team at Walsall and the reserve team at Walsall for a few years, that keeps ringing in my ears all the while when I think seriously about it.
And obviously, you moved from Walsall to another one of our clubs, with our great clubs, West Bromwich Albion. We had last week we had Graham Williams and Mickey Fudging, and obviously you'd have played with those guys. Yeah. Good memories of the Albion whilst you were there, for seven or 8 years.
Fabulous. I mean, whenever we get invited to do's and people ask you various questions off the floor, and I can't ever remember going away with an Albion team thinking we weren't going to win.
You were confident.
There was that many good players in the team.
I mean, Albion had a reputation whilst you were there for producing some really sort of good free-flowing football.
Fabulous. I mean, Don Howe was probably, him and Jimmy Armfield were probably the first two attacking right backs. But the difference between them and the current lads, these lads were international class defenders first and foremost.
That was what they were there to do.
That's what they were there to do. And they only went forward when the situation allowed it. And it was then my job in the Albion team to fetch somebody back to cover Howard's position when he'd gone. And Graham Williams was a bit the same on the other side, because he originally came as a winger or a centre forward.
Yeah.
And unfortunately for him, he couldn't get forward so much because Clive Clark was playing in front of him. And Clive Clark was one of the fastest players you'll ever see on a football pitch. So Willie could never catch him to overlap him.
Well, it'd make it difficult for him to get round the outside, wouldn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So consequently, that side of it at West Brom, there was a fabulous playing staff. And my biggest plus going there was the fact that Joe Kennedy, who was an absolutely tremendous centre-half, he was 34 and on his way the end of the season that I signed. When I got in, with 11 matches to go, I think he got injured or something, but it was about 11 matches to go and we didn't lose between then and the end of the season. And in those 11 games, and in the seasons after until he got transferred to the Arsenal, Don Howe was always talking in my right ear. I used to get fed up of listening to his voice.
Did the final whistle blow and you tell him to...
I told him to bugger off.
Keep it quiet. Yeah.
But that's the sort of information that you can't buy that.
No.
It has to be implanted at the time when it's going to be of use.
And it sort of soaks in gradually until you turn 20, you know, reach your late 20s, and then you peak as a defender, don't you?
And they you know, they used to allocate responsibility in a different way in that time. We had a reserve team trainer at the Albion called Wilf Dixon. And Wilf Dixon was one of these guys who anybody can sit in the stand and say, oh, that centre forward's beating Stan Jones in the air.
Yeah.
He'd sit and watch the game, and he said to me at half time, now listen, he's beating you in the air because... And he'd give me a reason.
I'm going to have to just stop you there briefly, Stan, because the half-time whistle is approaching, but we'll be talking more after the break, so don't go anywhere. Welcome back. We are here with former Walsall and West Brom footballer Stan Jones. Stan, before the break, we'd sort of touched on your career at West Brom. Obviously, you've made... you know, around 200, 250 first-team appearances there. I mean, that's a great track record for any professional in the game.
Oh yeah, the main part about that sequence was I was fortunate with injuries and basically received only the normal knocks and cuts around the eyes and that sort of thing that was common with centre halves in those days, the fact that I was able to cope without having knee injuries or ankle injuries or pulled muscles enabled me to be considered most weeks for the first team, you see. And as long as I'm playing reasonably well or well, in those days, especially if the team was winning, they'd never think of changing a winning team unless it was really, you know, a real star player coming back in. During those 6 or 7 years that I was currently in the side, the experience from that and the fact that I knew I was worth a place in the team more than made up for the fact that I missed out on 3 cup finals.
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, a lot of Albion fans look fondly on reaching, you know, the cup final in '68, winning the League Cup in '66, obviously.
Yeah.
But you know, for a player who had such a great track record, it must have been very frustrating to have been injured.
It was. We had a bit of an argument with Jimmy Hagan before the West Ham home and away games in the final of the League Cup, which was the last year that the League Cup final was played at the grounds of the 2 finalists. The year after it went to Wembley, where we got there again but lost to Queen's Park Rangers. Rodney Marsh turned us over second half. And those 2, plus the fact that the only serious injury I had started in the start of '67-68 season, which was the season that the Albion won the FA Cup. And I was in a hospital bed for about 3 weeks at West Bromwich around the August-September time, and didn't get back into any sort of condition to train till about November or December. And of course, the Albion were then in full flow.
And it was hard to get your place back.
It's like everything else. When things are going well, the first team players are the lads in the limelight, and that's how it should be. That's how it always will be. And you can be a great. I mean, look at Wilshaw at Arsenal. Yeah. Fabulous player, but he's been injured that many times that if he can now get over this lot and play 2 or 3 seasons non-stop, he'll think more about those 2 or 3 seasons than what he'll think about all the rest of the time.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Because you've got to be in there playing to the best of your ability to be able to look back at the end of your career and say, well, I had a great time.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a big thing to be able to say that. So disappointed though as I was about missing out on the 2 cup finals, the second one at Wembley with Queen's Park Rangers, I'd pulled a hamstring about 3 weeks before. I think it was at Leeds, and up until 1:30 on the day of the final, I was in the side, and Jimmy Hagan said, I'll test you on the track of the hotel.
Yeah.
And he tested me there, and I was honest with him and said, look, I think I can play, but I am feeling a tweak. I said, and I'm certain I can play with an injection, which really was in many ways my responsibility to say that, because he might have said that to me. But if me saying it meant that I was taking the responsibility of, if I did something silly under anaesthetic that I couldn't feel, then that was my fault for saying I'd like to play.
And I mean, but understandably, you were very keen to play in that game.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But and my mum went to Wembley from Highley on the bus and cried in the stand when when I walked up the track, you know, with Jimmy Hagan. Yeah. It's really sad.
But I mean, obviously, you know, apart from that, making so many first-team appearances, I've got to ask you, who was the best player that you've played against? You played against some fantastic players.
Yeah, without any shadow of doubt, Dennis Law was the guy that ticked all the boxes, in my opinion. I saw him about a month ago at Tony Brown's unveiling of the statue, and I was having a chat with him then. He's a great lad, and he'd got the lot, and he'd also got, which made him even worse, he'd got the boniest elbows and knees you'd ever find in anybody.
Well, coming up against you, was he on the crosses,
always,
digging them in? Yeah.
Always. And if you happen to catch him, which is always a possibility when there's a ruck of players going for the ball in the box, you could bet your boots that if you caught him, you could be looking for one back.
Yeah.
And not everybody was able to do that.
I suppose that's a very good quality for a centre forward to have, really. You know, as a centre half, you might think twice. You know, if you're going to leave one on him, you know, some point during the game it's going to come round.
Exactly, exactly. And there was nothing nasty about him, unless he thought it was deliberate. If he thought it was deliberate, I've seen him have a go at one or two people who've done him first. But he was accepted, like we all had to accept, that it is. And Alan Shearer keeps on about it. It's a physical game.
It's a contact sport, isn't it? Yeah.
Exactly. And he said, I don't think the rules have been changed, Shearer keeps saying, and I'm sure he's right. But the minute there's some sort of physical contact, then the whistle goes. And ironically, during training sessions, we used to have shoulder charging sessions in amongst the training program. Yeah, that's exactly.
Was the purpose of that sort of beefing you up?
It's to get people used to having bodily contact.
Yeah, and keeping your balance while your body's under
exactly,
duress,
and being able to. I mean, the first 3 games that I played in the reserves at the Albion, I think I lost a chip off that tooth and one at the bottom. And Wilf Dixon said to me, he said, I'm going to teach you, he said, how to defend yourself. And it's not dangerous in any way, but most people who jump for header football, if you're doing that, it's daft.
Yeah.
But if that is in front of the chest, as an extension of the chest, it's just a bodily contact moving people away. And I don't ever remember cutting anybody, or I had more cuts because we used to have to try and get the ball over the head of the people.
Oh yeah, you have to.
And that causes the cuts. And ironically, at Albert Macpherson's funeral about a month ago, it transpired that at the Manor Hospital where he'd been in, they could see he'd had between 13 and 14 cuts above and around the eyes.
Oh, really?
In his career, yeah.
Wow. And you know, obviously, Albion this season have had quite the season, really. They've gone from sort of Alan Irvine to Tony Pulis.
Yeah.
And I know you're a big admirer of Tony Pulis.
I am. I was so impressed when he was watching the first game from the stand, and within a quarter of an hour he'd come down from the stand and started to stop the incessant passing of the ball backwards and forwards across the back four and into the midfield and then getting it back. And since he's been here, I've watched them about 3 or 4 times, and they are a far, far more direct side. It's nothing to do with long balls or short balls. It's a matter of position of the ball on the pitch once the midfield players have got it. And he is instigating a movement forward rather than a movement sideways or backwards. And Alan Shearer's on about it all the while. He said the first thing any midfield player should do when the ball comes to him is think, can I go forward? Now, if Shearer don't know from what the position he played, then nobody knows. And of course, the more he comes forward towards him, in the space by the side of him, the more he'll run.
It's very direct, isn't it? Yeah.
And it's nothing to do with having 20, 30, 40, 50 passes on the halfway line, finishing on the halfway line. Mm. There used to be training sessions for that as well in my time, where if the passing of the team had been a bit astray, they'd have 7, 8 or 9 aside on half the training pitch, and all that the 2 teams are going to do is try and keep the ball as many times as possible with no end result. Mm. You weren't trying to score in one of the goals. Mm. You're just trying to keep a number of passes going, and the trainer will be shouting them out, 1, 2, 3, you know, up until it could be 20, 30 or 40. Mm. But that's a practice match situation.
Goals and games, don't they? Oh, yeah. Thank you very much for joining us, and join us again next time for another edition of Extra Time.